Hey everybody, welcome to Esopus Meadows here on the beautiful, mighty, majestic Hudson River. We're going to have an awesome time today. We're going to look at some different stuff all about the Hudson River. And we here at Esopus Meadows work for Hudson River Sloop Clearwater. You're going to be seeing the boat a little bit later today. My name is Eli. I have some awesome colleagues here that are going to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Anna, and I'm one of the crew members on the Sloop Clearwater.
And I'm Marilia, and I'm also one of the crew members on the Sloop Clearwater.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit. Thanks. So they're going to be helping out with the camera. They're going to be helping out with some of the experiments we're going to do, and you'll get to see them a little later on when you take a tour of the sloop. So yeah, here we are, Esopus Meadows. What a beautiful spot. I don't know if Marilia can pan around, and I'll point to the awesomeness, and you'll probably can't see the lighthouse, but we'll show you that a little bit later, or maybe she can. So yeah. Esopus Meadows is at River Mile 87. So that means we are 87 miles from the mouth of the Hudson River, okay? And I have a chart here that will actually show us where we are. Let me get the right one. And so yeah, so you might be noticing this, I call this a chart, and you're saying, well, isn't that a map? Well, technically charts and maps are different. A chart shows a lot of information about the water and not so much information about the land. So this is used for navigation on the water. So it's not really gonna look similar to anything like you might have like Google Maps or whatever. But I can still show us where we are. And let's see, let me get the camera, and really you can tell me if I need to go up or down, closer or farther away.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so Esopus Meadows right there. So that's the lighthouse, we will show you in a little bit. And this is a little stream that we're right next to. It's right up in that corner of the cove there. And then so we're like right here. All right, so that's Esopus Meadows, and then just a little frame of reference. Here's Kingston, New York. Maybe you've heard of that. If you've heard of Poughkeepsie, it's somewhere down here. And maybe like there, and then the town of New Paltz is over here. I don't know if you guys have heard of any of those communities, all right? But let me show you a chart puzzle that's a little bit closer to you. Okay, and you heard me say puzzle, and so maybe that is making you realize why it's in these funny shapes. So let me get it right side up. So you can actually, we actually have a little lesson where you build the entire Hudson River. So out of these charts, puzzle pieces. So this is Manhattan, all right? This is like 110th Street, Riverside Park, all right? New Jersey over here. So this is sort of upper Manhattan, okay? I know you guys live in, I know your school is in lower Manhattan, so let me show you this one really quick. All right. Doesn't actually have your school on it, but pretty close to your neighborhood. Here, I don't know if you guys know Peck Slip.
Yeah.
Peck Slip or John Street. Basically, this is the southern tip of Manhattan. I believe right here, maybe that's the Staten Island Ferry Terminal, or maybe it's right over there. But anyway, Grace Church School is somewhere up in this area. Governor's Island, Brooklyn. This is Red Hook down here. Southern tip of Manhattan, the Battery. So this is technically River Mile 0. This is where the river begins, and then it goes up north along the west side of Manhattan. All right, so that's a little bit about where we are and where you are, but now we need to talk about the river. And it's we're all getting used to this new platform, and my teaching style is that I ask a lot of questions. So it's a little hard when you guys are on the other end, but that's okay. I'm gonna pretend I am a third grader, and so I will answer the questions that I ask myself. I know, crazy. Maybe I won't do that too much. Sounds kind of annoying, but anyway. I do ask the question of all the students that come out to Esopus Meadows. I ask them, what do you know about the Hudson River? And I get a lot of different answers. There's usually we could probably put together like a top 5 list. But the one I'll start with is actually a kind of a silly answer that I sometimes get from middle schoolers, because I'll say, what do you know about the Hudson River? And some smart student raises their hand and says, it's a river. And I look at them and I'm like, I can see why you answer that, but guess what? You're not correct. Now, there is a section of the Hudson River that is a river, and yes, you'll probably hear me call it the Hudson River. You'll probably hear people on the sloop call it the Hudson River, but this body of water right here at Esopus Meadows does not behave like a river. How does a river behave? Well, a river is fresh water traveling downhill. One direction is the way a river always travels, downhill. So here at Esopus Meadows, we actually have tides. Because we are directly connected to the ocean, we have we have high tide and we have low tide. So we are affected by the tide. So the current can actually move in two different directions. It can go north, it can go south. So if you're in a body of water that's not the ocean and you have tides, it's called an estuary. So if you haven't ever said that word before, say it at home. Say estuary. Go ahead, crew.
Estuary.
Thank you, crew. All right, so the crew said estuary for you. Go ahead, say it one more time. Estuary.
Estuary.
Thank you. Now, what is an estuary? You may be asking yourself, if it's not a river and it's not an ocean, what is it? Well, I have a couple different ways to remember what an estuary is, and one is a rhyme and one is a pantomime. And oh, hey, that rhymes too. So I'm going to give you the pantomime first, and I'm going to ask the crew to come out and help me, Marilia and Anna. All right, so this is an estuary without even using words. Perhaps you've played charades before, okay? All right, so hopefully we're all in the shot there because we don't have a camera person anymore. So here we go. Do it with me. One more time. All right, let's do it. Let's try to do it in rhythm. All right.
Well, that was pretty good.
That was good, right?
so good.
And then a lot of people go like, right? Like, what did they just do? First word sounds like, no, we're not gonna get into that. All right. So, what kind of water is on the planet? All right, Marilia, what do you think this hand represents? What kind of water?
This one is salt water.
Salt water. Excellent. So, Anna, this must be
Freshwater.
freshwater. Those two kinds of water. We got both kinds of water in the Hudson River, and they come together. They merge. They collide. They join, right? They mix. I suppose that's the easiest word, right? And if you want a scientific word for that, that's called brackish water, and it's fun to say if you have gravel in your throat. Brackish. Brackish. Let's hear it, crew.
Brackish.
Right, just like a pirate. All right, so we got salt water, you got fresh water. When you have a mixture, you have brackish, but here is the key. So we got our salt water, we got our fresh water, we got it mixing. This is the key, and I already mentioned it, and it has to do with the tides, right? So which tide is this, Marilia?
High tide.
No, that's not high enough, Marilia.
High tide.
No, with the
Your
voice. High tide. Anna?
Low
Oh,
tide.
no. Low tide.
That's as low as I get.
All right, let's try it. High tide. Low tide. One more time. Come on, nice and high.
High tide.
Low tide. All right, I know you're all doing it at home because it's so much fun. All right, so thank you, crew. Oh wait, no, don't go anywhere because
Okay.
that's only the pantomime. Here's the rhyme. All right, repeat after me. Where the river
Where the river
meets the sea
meets the sea
makes the estuary.
meets the estuary.
All right, does it rhyme? Close. All right. Where the river
Where the river
meets the sea
meets the sea
makes the estuary.
makes the
You have
estuary.
to kind of draw it out so that it rhymes. All
Say
right.
every syllable.
You say every syllable very clearly. All right. Yes. So those are a couple different ways to remember what the estuary is. All right. Basically, if you're in a place that has tides, all right, and then it's not the ocean, you're in an estuary. Because here at Esopus Meadows, all right, maybe one more time you want to pan around, Marilia, show them the river. Here at Esopus Meadows, we have fresh water, right? You're looking at that water, you're saying, oh, that must be fresh. No, you can't just look at it and say it's fresh, okay? And we'll talk maybe a little bit more about how you might test for how much salt is in the water. But I can tell you, I've been here a long time, this is fresh water. So even though it's fresh water, it is still tidal. And that leads us to an experiment that we're going to do where we're going to check out and try and measure what the tide is doing. Is it rising? Is it falling? All right? So stand by for a second.
Rolling.
All right, so now we're going to do a little experiment and try and figure out what the tide is doing. Is the tide rising? Is it falling? Is it high tide? Is it low tide? And we're going to do it with this. We're going to do that with our trusty little tide stick right here. So I'm going to take this down to the water's edge. I'm going to place it right at the water line, and then we'll come back a little bit later and check it out and see if the tide is rising or is it falling. So maybe you at home want to take a guess. Take a guess now. Do you think the tide is rising? Do you think it's falling? Marilia is going to show you the water, show you the water line. So you can see the water, you know, it's pretty close to the edge of the grass, so that might give you a little indication of whether it's high or low. But the question really is the tide rising or is it falling, right? So we're going to get the water coming up even more than it already is, or is the tide going to start to go out? So when we talk about tide, we're talking about water moving. Tide is water moving this way and that way, whereas current is water moving north and south. So when the tide is falling, the current goes south. when the tide is rising, the current will be going north. All right, so we talked about the saltwater parts of the estuary with the tides, right, being affected by the ocean, right? The moon actually causes the tides, so that's how we get the tide, and that's how we get salt water into our Hudson River estuary. And you know, if you're in New York City, the water is going to be pretty salty. Now, as you travel north, it's going to get less and less salty because of the fresh water coming into the system. So where does the fresh water come from? Well, it comes from the watershed. Here's the word right up there, watershed, okay? And you're thinking, is that a building where they keep water? No, it is an area of land. Thank you, crew. They do the same jokes every day. All right? This is an area of land that drains into a body of water, a single body of water. So maybe maybe you've been to like Prospect Park, right? And there's a pond in Prospect Park. So that pond has a watershed, has an area of land that if it rains on that area of land, it's going to eventually drain into that little pond in Prospect Park. Now, the Hudson River being incredibly long, 315 miles, 315 miles from source to sea, that's going to be a lot of water. All right, and you're going to have all these different tributaries feeding that fresh water into the Hudson River. So a way to think about it is that this brown and green area is kind of like a giant bathtub. And every bit of water that comes into this big area will eventually drain downhill and into the Hudson River and down to New York City right here and then out into the ocean, okay? So what would make these borders, right? It's kind of an interesting, funny little shape, right? It doesn't really look like any sort of political boundary, right, or map-like. But if you were able to look a little closer and you have good eyes, you can see it says Catskill Mountains, Adirondack Mountains, Taconic Mountains. So basically, it's high ground, right? If you were right up here on the Taconic Mountains and your foot had 1 foot in the green and 1 foot in the gray, you would be on the top of a mountain. You'd be on a ridge or a hill. And if you poured water down one side, it would go downhill into the Hudson River. And if you poured it down the other side, it would go downhill into another watershed, which I believe would be the Housatonic, if you're curious. If you know Connecticut at all, the Housatonic River empties into Long Island Sound down here. So we have the source of the Hudson River right here at the top, at the base of Mount Marcy. It's the highest point in the Hudson River, and everything else travels downhill. And you can see the water from all these tributaries goes down past Albany, past Catskill, Kingston, we're like right here, down to New York City. The saltwater really probably only comes up to about maybe like Newburgh, pretty much this area right here. But it can move, right? Depending on how much rainfall we get, that salt front can move up and down the river. Let's see, so this creates the borderline. What else did I want to share with you? I mean,
well,
yeah.
I noticed the watershed, it's not just in the state of New York, right?
That's what I wanted to mention. Tell us more, Anna.
Well, I see that there's like a corner of it that goes into Vermont there and a corner of it that goes into Massachusetts. Maybe even a little bit down in Connecticut there.
And don't forget New Jersey.
And
Don't forget New Jersey.
Come on now. All right. So Anna, I think what Anna is trying to get across is that just because we're trying to clean up the Hudson River here in New York, does that mean that they're doing the same thing in Massachusetts? I think they are. I hope they are. And they definitely have their own rivers to worry about. But it just kind of shows that this watershed doesn't really have anything to do with political maps, all right? If there's any pollutants here in Vermont, all right, it's going to eventually make its way down into the Hudson River, all right? Same with Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey. Now you might be saying, if it rains up here, is it actually all going to travel all the way down here? True. There is the water cycle. It might evaporate, okay? But the point is that if it does rain in there, it could end up down here. And if someone is polluting here in Vermont, it could end up down here in our Hudson River. So this is the freshwater system in the Hudson River watershed. We've talked about the estuary ecosystems in terms of its water, in terms of its hydrology, for a fancy word. And you know that we have fresh water, we have salt water, and when that mixes, it's brackish water. So that leads to an incredible amount of diversity. An estuary is one of the most diverse ecosystems on the planet. And that's because you can have freshwater animals living there, you can have animals coming in from the ocean, you can have animals that will only live in brackish water, which just means slightly less salty than the ocean. So our specimen here is not moving around too much, but it's doing all right. But it looks like you can see right at the front a distinctive characteristic. And as you are all scientists, you might make the claim, hey, that's a catfish. I see those whiskers. That must be a catfish. So now you're making a claim and you have to use evidence to make your claim, and your evidence is that it has whiskers. Now, as a scientist, you would say barbels, right? Because that's the scientific name for those sensory organs, the whiskers. So the barbels tell you that it's a catfish. Now, if you use your reasoning, you have to ask yourself, now, just because it has barbels, does that make it a catfish? And no, it doesn't, because there are lots of fish in the estuary that do have barbels that are not catfish. So you would need more evidence. So your claim, your evidence, your reasoning will lead you to a conclusion. So one way to get more evidence is to use something called a dichotomous key. Now, a dichotomous key is a guide to help you identify organisms. And what it does is it gives you a series of choices. So in the dichotomous fish key that Clearwater uses, that we produce, one of the first questions is actually, does this animal have barbels? And so in this case, you would say, yes, it does have barbels. So you would continue on in the book or on the online version that we have, and it would ask you more questions to try and narrow down what exactly you have caught. So another question it might ask you is, what is the shape of the tail? Is it round? Is it square? Is it forked? So these are all questions that will help you get down to determining what species of creature this is. So in this case, this creature has a square tail. It's a little bit hard to see. It does have a little bit of a gap in it, but this is actually a square tail. And a forked tail would be much more deeply forked with a big V shape in it. So that square tail is actually the indicator that this is not a catfish. This is a bullhead. Now, the bullhead is in the catfish family. It's related to catfish, but it is a different species. So this is our bullhead, and if you can get a look at its mouth, I don't want to disturb it too much, but it might move around a little bit for us, and then they're a pretty hardy fish, so we can, well, sorry, buddy, but we just want to show off the mouth there. Thank you, my friend. So there you go. So you can see it has that really wide mouth, really big head up front. That's how it's got its name, the bullhead. Right, really big bull-shaped head up front, and then a sort of a narrow tapered body behind it. All right, so there you go. There's a great view of its mouth and its barbels. So bullhead are scavengers. They eat off the bottom of the river, and that's one of the reasons that their barbels are so important, because you can look at its eyes and you can see it doesn't have very big eyes in relation to its body. So it uses the sensory organ of its barbels to find its food, and those barbels actually have 3 different senses in them. They can not only touch, they can taste and smell. So those barbels are really what allows the bullhead to find its food. Now, let me ask you this. Do you have to be very fast to catch dead stuff? No, guess not. Probably not. So this animal, if you were to touch it, it wouldn't feel very strong. It would feel kind of like gushy and soft because it doesn't have really strong muscle tone, because it doesn't have to swim fast. It can just sort of cruise along the bottom using its mouth almost like a vacuum cleaner, just kind of sucking up all the dead animal parts that are down on the bottom of the river. So that's one adaptation of this bullhead, is having those barbels that allows it to find its food. And then if it moves around a little bit more, I don't know if it'll follow my hand a little bit there, but you can see it has another adaptation called counter shading. Counter shading is a type of camouflage, right? So it allows it to blend into its surroundings. So now that it's moving around, you can see that it's dark on top and light on the bottom. That's what counter shading is. Maybe you can think of another species of animal that has counter shading. There are lots of them out there. Counter shading is great because they live in the water. So if you are in the water looking down at this fish, it's going to look like the bottom of the river. But now if you're an animal that's at the bottom of the river looking up, that white belly is going to look like the surface of the water. So that's an example of counter shading. It's a very common type of camouflage that animals will have. Here's one: a bird that flies underwater with counter shading. Can you think of that one? It's not in the Hudson River. So just a little warning on these bullhead. They do actually have a little spike in their dorsal fin. So if you ever to catch a bullhead, be careful of that dorsal fin. There's a little pointy tip right at the front of that dorsal fin. It's not poisonous, but it is sharp. So do be careful. So that's some of the characteristics of our bullhead. And thank you for watching this segment. Here's a distinctive looking creature from our Hudson River estuary. You're probably observing claws and legs and a hard shell, and that evidence would probably lead you to claim that this is a crab, and you would be correct. This is the blue-clawed crab. Lives in many different parts of the Hudson River estuary. Generally, you're going to find them in the saltier parts, in the brackish areas of the Hudson River estuary, but you will occasionally find them in in the fresher parts of the estuary. So you're looking at this crab and you're saying, well, I don't see any blue. Why isn't it called the red-claw crab? And it's true, it does have some red tips on the end there, but if it were to open up its claws on the inside, you would see a blue tinge. Now you might be saying, well, those claws look pretty serious, pretty aggressive, and you would be right. They can easily defend themselves with those claws, and that red and blue, you're probably thinking is not really good camouflage in a brown and green river, and you are right. So those colors are actually more of a warning, more of an advertisement, like, hey, I got some serious claws, they hurt, don't make me use them. So those blue claw crabs will definitely use those claws for defense. Are they predators? Not really. If something swims or crawls by that they can grab with those claws, they will certainly try to eat them. But as you can see, they don't really have like a well-defined mouth. They don't have jaws. They don't have teeth. They actually have these like sliding plates that come across their mouth and allow them to open, to bring in food, to bring in water. Crabs do have gills. They breathe with their gills that are inside their mouth there. So crabs are really scavengers, though. Their main way of eating is scavenging. So they're using those claws to tear up bits of dead animals, to tear them up into smaller and smaller parts that will be allowed to fit into that sort of sliding plate mouth that they have. So they're scavengers, and as they break up those dead fish and other animals in the river, they actually help other organisms by breaking down that dead matter and giving food to other animals like decomposers or smaller crabs or something like that. So this is our blue claw crab. You can see in the back there, it's a great little shot of those swimmerettes. I don't want to disturb it too much, but you can see those little paddles on the back. That's an indication that this is a swimming crab. You'll see other crabs in the estuary that are walking crabs, and they don't have those swimmerette, those paddle-like legs on the back. Things like mud crabs, that sort of thing, that will come in and out of the water and walk on the bottom of the river. So this is a swimming crab. It does generally live at the bottom of the river because that's where most of the dead stuff is, but it can swim. It can also walk across the bottom. You can see can you see its antennas moving there? So that's another sort of sensory organ. They have two eyes right there. Let's see if I can get it to move it a little bit. I really don't want to disturb it, and it'll certainly go after my hand if I put my finger in the water. There you go. There's a little blue tinge for you. So we always take great care with these animals. This animal's been living in my tank at home for a little while, and I feed it things like frozen shrimp, and it actually even ate some of the goldfish flakes that I put in there in times, and maybe you just saw it open those plates. And when it's opened its claws, you're able maybe to see a little bit of the blue. So these crabs, one interesting adaptation of crabs is that they have to molt. They have to lose their shell in order to grow. So if you have ever gone to like a seafood store and you've seen soft-shell crab, it's most likely a blue claw. It's mostly likely that species. Soft-shell crab is just a stage in their life cycle. It's not actually a species. So when that crab outgrows its shell, it breaks apart at the back and backs itself out of the old shell, and it has another shell already there underneath it that is soft. And what it does is it takes that soft shell and it fills up its body with water, and that allows the shell to expand. And then when the shell hardens, they can release that water, and their body on the inside has room to grow. So one sort of analogy is like maybe when you buy clothes, you buy them a couple of sizes too big because you're going to grow into them in a couple of years, right? Or whoever you live with is like, oh, we're getting that a size larger because you're going to wear that for 2 years, right? So that's similar with a blue claw crab. How often do they molt? It really depends on their size. When they're young and they hatch from an egg and their larva, after their larval stage, they'll probably molt like every 2 weeks to every month. As they get bigger, they won't molt as often. How big do they get? Well, in order to take that, you can see it moving its plates right now. Can you guys see that? Oh yeah, that's really nice. So They are actually one of the few animals from the Hudson River that is safe to eat. There are unfortunately health advisories on most of the fish that live in the Hudson River due to contamination and pollutants from humans. But this is one exception. So people do go crabbing in the Hudson River, and I do believe they have to be 4.5 inches across in order for you to keep them and eat them. So they get pretty big. This one's maybe 2 inches across, maybe 1.5 inches. How old is it? There's really no way to tell because it just depends on how successful it's been at feeding, right? The more food it finds, the faster it's going to grow and the bigger it's going to get. Again, I don't want to disturb it, but if you're able to see underneath, you can actually tell whether a crab is male or female by the shape of its tail. So when the female is carrying eggs, that underside is actually like really big and bulky, and there's like something like thousands of eggs under that one crab can carry, and so that whole belly is sort of like exposed. You can actually see the collection of eggs. It's pretty amazing. So a female crab has a much wider tail on the bottom, and then the male is a little bit more narrow. So those are some of the adaptations, some of the parts of the blue claw crab that we find here in our Hudson River estuary. All right, so we've had the tide stick in the water probably about 25 minutes, so it wasn't a huge amount of time to see what the tide is doing, but it has changed. So as Marilia comes closer, you'll be able to see this is where we put it in the water originally, and the water has come up, whoops, dropped something, come up another couple of inches. So yeah, just in 25 minutes, it's come up a little bit. And you know, as you may have guessed, right, because it's kind of close to the grass, you're probably thinking it's high tide. And it's true, the highest the tide will come up will be somewhere probably around here. Now, of course, if you have floods, you could have a little bit more. But in general, the high tide line is right around here. And that's affected by the moon. So if it's a full moon or a new moon, you actually get high tides that are higher than normal and low tides that are lower than normal. And then at other times of the month, you'll have what they call neap tides, right? So spring tides are when they're really big, and then you have neap tides when they're not quite so high and quite so low. So we are still having the tide come in. One thing that happens when the tide comes in is that as it comes in, it gets slower, and then as it turns, it speeds up. So if it were to switch and we'd wait 25 minutes, we'd actually see a much greater drop in the tide because it kind of does change speeds throughout that cycle, which is kind of interesting and another thing you might want to explore. So I just wanted to show you the Esopus Meadows Lighthouse. I talked about it a little bit. It's going to be a bit of a speck out there, but there are lots of online resources where you can get a closer look at it. And you might be asking, why is it a speck? Why is it way out there? Well, this entire area is called the Meadows because it is extremely shallow. At low tide, it'll only be about 2 feet deep, okay? So from here to the lighthouse at low tide, it's only about 2 feet deep. So that's incredibly shallow. And so that lighthouse is over there to warn the boaters to stay on the other side of that lighthouse. So at low tide, it's about 2 feet. On the other side of the lighthouse, it's like 50 feet deep. So there's a big shoal, they call it, right here. And then right on the other side of the lighthouse, it drops off, and that's the channel, and that's where all the big boats go. So another reason it's called the Meadows, I said this already, but it's very shallow, but it also gets covered with vegetation. So there's lots of different aquatic plants that grow there. And I want to show you one version of it. And what made us think of it was we had a question from the students, one student the other day, and they said, is there anything in the Hudson River that can hurt you without you even bothering it? Or something like that, without you even coming near it or something. But it was really interestingly phrased question. And Marilia came up with this great answer. She's like, yes, this will hurt. Look at this thing. You guys actually might see them down in Manhattan. They won't grow there because this is a plant. This is the seed of a plant that grows in fresh water. It's called a water chestnut, all right? It's not the same as you would have in Chinese food, but they do call it the water chestnut. And inside is a little seed. And so this seed causes a plant to grow, right? Seeds plants grow from seeds. And then actually we have one right here that is just starting to emerge. So this is seasonal. It dies off in the winter, but you can see the little sprout, the little stem comes out. These are technically not called roots. They're called holdfasts. They're basically just an anchor to hold it down to the bottom of the river. And then the leaves reach up towards the sun. So the leaves actually float on the surface. If you come back a month later, you'd see little pockets, little bubbles, little pockets of air in the that will hold the leaves up towards the sun. So if you were to come up here, and this is a park that's open to the public, so if you guys get out of New York City, come up to Esopus Meadows, this entire area is covered in this huge mat of green growing plants. And unfortunately, it is a non-native species. So this is originally from Asia, and it was introduced by accident into the Hudson River, and it's kind of been here ever since. It's been here for like over 100 years, close to 140 years now. So it's not going anywhere, unfortunately. It is a problem because it doesn't allow the native species to grow. Because it grows to the surface and floats on the surface, it doesn't allow any sunlight to get down to the bottom of the river where some of the other native aquatic plants might live. But again, if you're hiking on the riverbank and you're in your flip-flops, that is going to cause some damage. So be careful. Be careful when you're on the shores for those water chestnuts. But let's show one more piece of vegetation, because we got this beautiful flower right here. Look at that. I don't really know my flowers, so maybe that could be a little bit of a mystery for you guys to explore. See if you can figure out what kind of flower that is. But it is quite pretty. And then, of course, there's some poison ivy next to it.
Don't want to step in that.
Don't step in that. All right. That ought to do it for now. We'll have some more information for you guys in a little bit. Great, so thanks for taking time to spend some time with us, for watching this. This is we work for Hudson River Sloop Clearwater. You guys are going to go check out the boat a little bit later on, but I just wanted to say thank you, and I just wanted to remind you that the Hudson River belongs to you. It's your river, and the more you use the Hudson River, the more you're going to enjoy it. The more you enjoy it, the more you're going to love it. And the more you love it, the more you're going to protect it. And that is really what our job is to encourage people to protect this beautiful and amazing treasure that we have here in the Hudson River. So get out to the river, go kayaking, go sailing, go hiking, just do as much as you can, because the river is an amazing place and we are so lucky to live in an area like this. So thank you for watching. Do you guys want to say anything?
We'll see you on the boat.
Yeah, see you
there
later.
You go. Yeah, on the sloop. All right. Nice job, everybody. Thank you.